Hi, welcome to Kitchen Chats. I'm your host, Aimee Kandrac, and I am here today with a special episode, and I brought my sister in as a guest. Thanks for joining me, Stepahnie.
Thanks for having me.
Today, we have a special episode because I, over the past few weeks, have been asking listeners to submit their kitchen moments. And I was so excited about doing this. I thought it was going to be so fun to share everyone's stories, especially because so many listeners had been reaching out to me personally with their stories. But as the time grew closer to share these stories, people were so reluctant for so many reasons. And the one that stuck out to me the most was the number of people who said, I actually can think of a lot of times I wish I could have called friends, but I didn't have anyone to call. I didn't feel like there was anyone who I could share with. I didn't feel like anyone would listen. I had one friend tell me that they did reach out to people in their biggest moment of crisis, and they felt like everyone abandoned them. So for our listeners, the reason that I called you, not only are you my sister and best friend and my first person to call, professionally, this is what you do. You're a licensed therapist. Mm-hmm. And I want us to try to dig into this a little bit, knowing that I know I don't have the answer, but I'd like to start that conversation.
Yeah. There are so many moments where we can feel like we don't have anybody to call, even if we have a big circle. Mm-hmm. And there are also moments that can happen, I think, when we realize that we don't have a circle. And I think there's probably, it may be a both and for some of your listeners who have reached out. They were experiencing maybe both of those things. So I think we had to get outside of our box as for thinking about that and who can we talk to. And yeah, I talk to people a lot. And, I talk to people all the time, but also I talk to people a lot about feeling abandoned. About feeling like I don't know who I can talk to about this. And sometimes even talking to me as their therapist, it can be hard.
Yeah.
And, I'm a person that people share their insights with.
Yeah.
At least that's my hope. That's the goal.
That's what I'm creating.
Right. I hope I'm creating the space for that. To me, where my mind goes is like, let's talk about some of those moments where we feel like we can't share. Or sometimes there's moments where we feel like nobody else is going to get this. So I can't share this. So I feel so isolated because I don't know who's going to understand.
Or there's a stigma around what I'm about to share.
Yes.
And what is that going to, how am I going to be perceived?
Yeah. If it's an issue around gender identity, if it's an issue around sexuality, those can be really hard moments of not knowing who's safe.
That is a big one. I think issues around mental health
absolutely
are really, really big.
Yeah, to open up and say to somebody, I'm in a really bad place, and I don't know what to do.
And the situation that I want to share with you may not have answers, may not be known, or it might be that it is a mental health thing that has a stigma around it. Yeah. And people don't want to open up about that.
Right.
Or the friends don't know how to respond.
Right. Yeah. So I think there's two sides of that. I think you bring up a good point. Like, how can you hold the space if someone is coming to you that maybe you didn't realize, like, oh shit, I am this person's kitchen person and I didn't realize that that's what I meant to them. How do you just hold the space and be open and accepting and value that.
Right.
Because that's a big deal.
So let's dig into that just for a second, because how do you know that you are that person? I mean, I assume if someone shares with me, then, and I don't know if this is the right assumption, right? I assume if someone shares with me, then it is okay for me to hold space for them, check in with them to make sure they are continuing to be okay, ask if there's anything else they need from me.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if everybody expects that, because sometimes when someone shares with you, there's a really big burden of, oh, shoot, now do I have to check in with them?
Mm-hmm.
Do I have to organize meals for them, or do any of these other things that might have triggered things for you personally?
Mm-hmm.
You might already be at capacity. You might just not know what to do.
Well, so I think, it seems, what I'm about to say probably seems so simple, but it's also really, really hard. We have to just ask.
Mm-hmm.
Put yourself into that place of vulnerability and being okay with not knowing. So to just ask, like, what do you need from me?
Mm-hmm.
How can I support you?
And be okay when they say, I have no idea.
Yes. That is 100% okay. And also, open the space to say, like, okay, I imagine that maybe you might need these things, but I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Help me understand as you come to understanding yourself.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what we don't know. We never, I hate to use the word never, but we don't want to assume. No two situations are exactly alike.
Exactly.
They are going to have so many similarities, but they're not going to be exactly the same. And so we don't want to assume that just because when one person got a diagnosis, it's going to be exactly the same as when somebody else got a diagnosis. Even if it's the same diagnosis, it's going to be different.
It's going to be different.
And we don't want to assume that one person's coming out story is the same as another's.
Mm-hmm.
Or that the family will receive them in the exact same way. There are just so many things we don't know. And so to put, your friend is coming to you in this place of deep vulnerability.
Deep vulnerability.
And so
yes.
Vulnerability meets vulnerability. So match that by saying, like, that you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay to say, like, I don't know what you need.
Right.
Help me to know you better.
Right. And thank you for allowing me to go along this journey with you.
Yes. We never know what we mean to someone else. Not never, but we often don't. We don't know when we may be the person that someone else needs. I often talk about with clients and with friends about, like, being a smart shopper and knowing who to go to for what.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, my go-to store is always Target. Like, that's where I'm going to start.
Mm-hmm.
And I love Target.
Oh, yeah.
And I often am asked, like, why would you grocery shop at Target? Well, because Target has everything I need. But sometimes they don't.
But sometimes they don't.
Sometimes they really don't. And sometimes I have to go to a different store. And sometimes I need to go to a different store. I'm not going to go to the hardware store for bread.
That is generally not going to come out very well.
No.
I mean, it could, but...
But you're going to end up disappointed. And so, I use this analogy of being a smart shopper, of knowing, trying to know, or learning to know who in your life sells what or can offer you what.
Mm-hmm. And it's okay to start at Target.
It is. But not everybody's going to be Target, and you don't want everybody to be Target. Like, you need those specialty stores too.
You really do.
And sometimes the specialty store may be somebody really, far out from your inner circle. Or if you don't have that inner circle, like, where can you go to find the support you need? There are so many resources available that we don't necessarily always think of.
And I think sometimes you can be really surprised as to who can provide those specialty things for you, because you might not realize that they have this skill set or have gone through a similar situation. When you're in that space of crisis, in that space of overwhelm, of I don't feel like I have anyone to call, figuring out what specialty store
Right.
it is often way too much.
It can be. And so, thinking through, it may not be a friend. It may be a professional.
It might be professional.
And that may be you go to your synagogue or your church, or a synagogue or a church, or another, faith establishment in your community. It could be you go to a community outreach center that has resources. If you have a diagnosis, within that healthcare system, there are likely social workers that are, or other providers that are specifically there to help you navigate emotionally as well as physically what's going on. So sometimes it can even just be like, okay, where's one point of contact of somebody I can reach out to that might know, somebody that can connect me with somebody else. Reaching out to a therapist is, I'm clearly biased, but it's never a bad idea.
Right.
And even if that therapist isn't the fit for you, they can help you find some of the other resources you do need. But sometimes we have to go not just to those intimate people that we know, but to another layer of like, okay, who are some professionals that could help me? And sometimes going to someone you don't know can feel more comfortable in those moments.
Oh, of course.
And that's 100% okay. Because there can be emotional safety in being vulnerable with somebody who doesn't know everything.
Of course. Of course. So I'm a connector. I can't not do it. And I love to be able to say, hey, what about this person? What about this person? But I find sometimes that's not what people need.
Yeah.
And it's really hard for me when someone is vulnerable with me, because that is my like, no, I can help you find all the things.
Yeah.
But again, that can be overwhelming, and I like the idea of find that professional who can maybe be the first stop connector for you.
Yeah. As a connector, I think it is valuable to say to your friend, do you want me to help you find connections, or do you just want me to hold space and listen right now?
Yeah. And I think holding space and listening is the very first and most important. And as I have completed season 1 of this podcast, I've been reminded by every single guest of how important that is. The rest of it is amazing. All of the tips that we can come up with are so fantastic, but it is holding that space for people.
Community and connection are essential. A person I hold in very high esteem is Brene Brown.
Oh, yes.
And she talks about a lot about how as humans we are hardwired for connection. And when we reach out to a person, whether it be a friend, a family member, a professional, a complete stranger, we are seeking and receiving connection. And to just feel heard and feel seen is so valuable. So finding that connection point, being that connection point, and not everything needs to be fixed.
That is something I need to internalize myself sometimes. Yeah. And it's hard for a lot of us. I'm projecting that because that's totally me. I like to be able to fix it.
We all do.
But holding that space and remembering that there might be another time to fix it later, but that time might not be right now.
And remembering that if you are the person receiving this information, it's not yours to fix.
Right.
Just because someone is sharing with you doesn't mean that they need you to fix it for them.
And that is such a good reminder for those people who sometimes don't know how to handle it when information has been shared with them, right? Like, I don't know how to fix it, so I'm just running away. And if we can move past that and just hold the space. And I wonder if for people who don't feel like they have anyone to reach out to, if they can remember, which is hard, right? Like if you're in the time of crisis, like you don't know what you need. But I'm simply sharing because I would love it if you can help me hold this space. I don't need you to do anything. I just need you to help me hold this space or help hold me while I'm in this space for a few minutes. Or days or weeks or months or however long it is.
Right.
And I wonder if we can, I don't know. I don't know what the answer to this is other than it breaks my heart when I hear of people who I have known and been friends with and have been in their life when something has happened and they didn't feel that they could share. So what are the things that we can do?
Well, and sometimes we can't, because until a person is ready, we can't, because we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
But I think awareness around the fact that there are so many resources and being confident of like, okay, yeah, sometimes I have to really stretch myself, find safety, even if it's not somebody that you are really, really close with. If it just feels like it's the right person to be safe with, that's okay.
Yeah.
Finding those outside resources, finding community of people who do get it, even if they're complete strangers.
Yeah.
To find a community of people. I mean, you can Google and find about anything. But, there are support groups for things. There are online forums. Like, we don't have to be alone, even when we feel like we are in the midst of so much isolation that nobody else gets it.
Yeah. Well, I have been recording season 2 already, and this week, one of the episodes that I recorded that won't come out until closer to springtime, we were talking about natural disasters. And I was speaking with the vice president of the Red Cross, and he said the number one predictor of whether or not a person is going to, I don't think he uses the word survive, but come out okay on the other side of any kind of natural disaster is how strong their community is around them. And I have known this with What Friends Do forever. People with stronger social support networks have better outcomes. They don't always have the outcome you want, but sometimes the journey is better.
Yeah.
And in those scared moments, reminding people, actually, scratch that. It's not in those scared moments. It's in those non-scared moments. If we can prepare ourselves the same way we would for a natural disaster, to have the phone numbers of all your neighbors, to have the phone numbers of, I say phone numbers, nobody's really calling, texting, but become Facebook friend. Do something to become connected to 2 or 3 people who can be your safety net in the future.
And that, I think in the age of technology, like, we come away from that. I mean, I think about like how we connected when we were kids. Somebody wasn't going to be home, if mom or a dad wasn't home after school, you just went and knocked on the neighbor's house and it was a safe place to go and it was fine. But now we don't always know our neighbors. So like, we have to be proactive so we don't have to be reactive. And that is such an essential thing. It's something I talk about with some of my clients that I work with in a short-term setting. If you move into a new community, you immediately go out and you find, not immediately, but you're going to find a dentist, you're going to find a doctor, you're going to find somebody to do your hair. You're going to figure out where you're going to go grocery shopping. If you have kids, where are they going to school? Like, you find all these resources. In the midst of doing that, find and ask people. They may think you are crazy, but it may also help break down some stigma. Ask, who are the good mental health providers in this area?
Yeah.
Find an individual counselor. Find a good kids therapist. Find a good marriage counselor, so that you have those numbers in your back pocket
when the time comes.
For if and when the time comes. So that when the time comes, you're not scrambling trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Especially because you may or may not have made connections already where you can trust, and not that they're not going to be good recommendations, but you might not feel in a spot to do that.
Right. But it's okay to ask people. Ask the checkout person at the grocery store, like, hey, do you know of any of X, Y, or Z
Mm-hmm.
in the area? I know.
Yeah, going into a local coffee shop that has a bulletin board. Yep. I feel like there are still a lot of local coffee shops that have bulletin boards, and there are often flyers, business cards for mental health professionals, even like
community outreach, support groups,
workout places.
Yes.
Right? Like your yoga studios, your gyms, your swimming pools, your YMCAs. They will often have a lot of resources for you as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So just being prepared in those ways, I think, is really essential. And how can you be a part of your community? And that's hard. That's a stretch for people, especially if you're dealing with mental health issues or something else. If there's something else going on inside your home that can feel very isolating. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of circumstances that, whether it's a physical issue that's going on or some sort of other emotional or social thing that is going on inside your home, it can be very, very isolating. And so allowing yourself to what are some of these connection points?
Well, and I think one thing that I just occurred to me as you were mentioning this, sometimes you don't have to share exactly what's going on. Mm-hmm. You can simply say, some things are going on with me right now. I'm in a space where I could maybe use some support. Mm-hmm. But that's a hard thing too. That's a really, really hard thing. And knowing that if someone does say that to you, you don't need to ask any questions other than, what's the best way I can support you?
Absolutely. I last night was texting with a friend who lives out of town, and she's going through some struggles and just is having a hard time. And she was able to say, I feel really alone. And this just feels like I just keep getting blow after blow. We chatted quite a bit, and then I separately texted a couple of other friends who I know her. Just said, hey, I think so-and-so could really use just some love right now. If you just wouldn't mind reaching out in some way to just let them know you're thinking of them.
So that's something I like to do, but I never know if it's okay.
Okay. My therapist mind went, and why does it feel like it's not okay?
This is why I never know if I should have you on as a guest.
Yeah, I know. It's always okay. Has it ever felt gross to you when someone sent a text and just said, hey, I'm thinking of you?
No.
That doesn't feel bad.
It doesn't. And I have had other friends and situations over the years where someone has said, hey, so-and-so's going through a rough time. Do you mind if we invite her along to lunch? Or if you see her, or if you feel like just sending a text or go on a walk, I think she could use some support right now.
Yeah. To be seen is so powerful. So to just be able to look down at your phone and just be like, oh, I have a text from Aimee. Wow, I haven't talked to this person in so long, but they're just reaching out just to let me know that they're thinking of me. Wow. We never know the difference that's going to make in a person's day for the better.
Yeah.
It's a connection point.
Well, I'm not sure that we have solved all of the world's problems yet today.
No, not yet.
Not yet.
Darn it.
And I don't know that it's going to be hard, right, if you feel so alone. But if they can at least reach out to a mental health professional or someone for that one connection point.
Yep. Even if that's, recognizing there are literally things at our fingertips. If you are feeling at a point of desperation and loneliness, dial a 988 for the suicide prevention line. You can text that or call it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It is
from anywhere.
And there is always going to be someone on the other end
who wants to talk to you.
Who does. And you are worth talking to. always.
Always worth talking to.
Every single one of us is always worth talking to, even when we feel like we are not. So, that can be hard to hold in some moments of real desperation. But I hope people know that they are valued, they are loved, they are worthy.
Yes. And a lot of things are hard. And it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining me for this important conversation.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
It.